My eyes already touch the sunny hill, going far ahead of the road I have begun. So we are grasped by what we cannot grasp. It has its inner light, even from a distance, and changes us, even if we do not reach it, into something else, which, hardly sensing it, we already are. A gesture waves us on, answering our own wave, but what we feel is the wind in our faces. That poem of Rainer Maria Rilke that for me just describes some of the spirit, the essence of the whole journey of the SOS over these 100 years, the whole journey of call, that relationship with God. What we feel is the wind in our faces. And to me, that's the gentle touch of the Spirit that we can feel in so many ways that keeps renewing us to continue that pilgrim walk.
For a full year leading up to the 100-year celebrations on August 15th, 2022, the Sisters of Service journeyed through their past, the century of Sisters of Service history, and the recent half-century during which their own lives of service ministry unfolded, changing ministries as needs changed, always upgrading academic qualifications, learning on the job, and often as not, working in non-Catholic secular situations, just as Catherine Donnelly advocated.
When I came to the West, to Norway, I landed in a public school. It caused a certain amount of anxiety to me. I was a whole year before I told my mother that I was teaching in a public school. In those very early days, parents would come in and sit in on the class. There was great hesitancy that we were proselytizing. Those experiences were short-lived. In fact, the school board would write letters to the sisters asking to have more sisters to come and teach in their schools.
In the Yukon, I was regional health educator for the territories, connecting with local women in the communities to promote a program called Home Visiting. The classes were about 2 weeks long, and it gave the women an opportunity to work with the community nurse to become more proactive in the whole area of healthcare delivery. I began to see if we could get women to be more upfront in terms of their leadership abilities, maybe society could be that much better. One delightful young woman had alcohol issues and relationship issues, and she decided to shape up. And she got her diploma in nursing and became a very significant worker in the community. So that's one of my good stories.
I grew up on a farm. The Indigenous were familiar to me, but the plight of the Indigenous in the city was quite different. I got hired by Children's Aid Society, Winnipeg, for a field office in the Indian Métis Friendship Center. I learned a lot through that. The frailty of human nature, the injustices of structural poverty and racism was beyond my imagining. But the Indigenous were coming into their own. They were talking about having their own Children's Aid Society. And I offered to help. The Sisters of Service are always kind of willing to say, well, why don't we? Maybe we could. Let's. And we didn't have to have it all worked out. We could sort of work it out as we went along.
When I went first to James Bay, it was the birthing of a Native mental health program. There was nothing. Mental health had never been heard of, and persons had never shared their pain. I was told numbers of times, we don't need you here. We have our own healers. So I kept trying to find ways to connect by freighter canoe to get across the river, skidoo taxi, or the real taxi across the winter road, or by small plane. The pilots used to call me the flying nun. Connecting meant listening. And my listening gradually opened up incredible pain. And one of the greatest gifts I received was hearing someone say, "Go see Sister Mary Ellen. She's good to talk to."
I became a teacher. I worked for 2 years in a school near St. John's, Newfoundland, and by then I started knowing the call that Catherine Donnelly had to go to remote places where the need was greater. I did find an isolated fishing harbor. Teachers before, young people, couldn't take the isolation and left before the school year was over, most years. And we spent 4 beautiful years there until a road connected the harbor to the main road, and there was no more problem for teachers to stay. It would be the best SOS time. We became part of that community.
My work in the North, in the Northern Teachers Education Program, was for Northern people, Northern communities, either Cree or Dene and Métis. Profs would come to the North to teach the teachers. Teachers training in their own community, in their own schools. I supervised teachers on the reserves, but to a great extent my work was with the Métis community. I learned at a classroom. It wasn't a classroom, it was their home. It was their community, very cooperative type of teaching, learning from each other, sharing. I was the learner and they were the teachers.
I went to do public health in high-level Alberta and to branch out into all of the remote areas around the North to minister to these people who had nothing and were far away from anything. There was an oblate priest living there, in a done-over chicken coop. And I thought, my goodness, the devotion of that man. And one day he asked me to come to his chicken coop to teach him how to use the sewing machine because he wanted to make moccasins. So I helped him learn how to sew. And on his wall was this little plaque, and it read, "This is not primarily the place where we have to be, it's the place where we are. This is not our prison, but our home. It is the road we must walk, and the walking of it is called life. Because we will walk it only once, then how important it is that we should walk it with some purpose that we can call our own." And so that's SOS. And that's Catherine Donnelly.
As Sisters of Service, ministry has been a very central part of our lives. And we've served in many places, in many different ways. And this has changed over time as there's been change in the church and in our world, and the needs of people have changed. A lot of us have lived in remote places, and these places could be without the usual presence of church ministers or the structures and amenities that might exist further in the southern parts of Canada. As our mission statement says, we have been missionaries.
Over the SOS century, the sisters would establish 55 education, social service, and health missions in Canadian rural areas, cities, and towns, and 3 more internationally. Many of these missions would last for decades. Some of them would change and change again for the times the sisters found themselves in, whether in teaching, nursing, social work, and public health. In post-Vatican II times, they were called to parish ministry. They provided spiritual and psychological counsel to those who were struggling. They worked in prisons, in centers for Indigenous peoples, in homes for the elderly and infirm, and in groups working for justice, peace, and care for the earth. Where there were no priests, no church buildings, the sisters anointed the dying, baptized newborns, married couples, and to generations of young and old, they witnessed to the spirit of their Catholic faith.
Again in Newfoundland, I went to our correspondence school of religion, and I spent 5 years teaching religion through correspondence to students who didn't have an opportunity to take a formal religious education, visiting the families, gathering the people in these arbors where the priest wasn't able to go and celebrate the Eucharist. We brought the Eucharist with us. We had lay-presided liturgy. We were like church to the people. I entered in 1967, and then I really didn't know much about Catherine Donnelly. At the novitiate, she was presented to us as being the first sister of service. Never mentioned that she was the one who had the inspiration of founding the community. But what we were taught at the novitiate was the purpose of the community, to go out and serve in teaching, nursing, and social work in places where the need was greatest. And that stayed with me. So where did I meet Catherine Donnelly? It was on Men Alive, much like you. And wow.
It was a lonely land, especially for the thousands of immigrants who arrived daily. Many of the immigrants were Catholic, but their church was not equipped to help them. All this bothered a spunky young schoolteacher from Alliston, Ontario, Catherine Donnelly.
Then I started to take in what I had experienced in the sisters I worked with, or I knew that they, even though it wasn't said so, they were all living the charism and spirit that God gave initially to Catherine Donnelly. And it just felt so right in me.
Looking at that Man Alive program and then reading her biography and then the book written on her spirituality. And so from them, she became a real person for me, you know, with her strengths, her weaknesses, her struggles. And I could identify with all of that.
Over the post-Vatican II decades, religious communities worldwide, including the Sisters of Service, saw their numbers diminishing with few new applicants coming their way. Even so, they went back to their histories to discover their founders, their original inspirations or charisms and intentions. The Sisters of Service researched and published key historical works on their foundress. In 1989, 8 years after the CBC's Man Alive program on Catherine Donnelly and her successors, the sisters worked with scholar Father John Manuel Lozano to review the precise nature of Catherine Donnelly's foundational charism and how this had been lived throughout SOS history. In many ways, the Sisters of Service's foundational ideas had prophesied key aspects of Vatican II, but they too had some rethinking to do. They dropped their previously innovative uniforms for everyday clothing. Ministries themselves would change from the tradition of following Toronto head office orders to each sister discovering and pursuing their own ministries. They discarded their top-down decision-making for what is known as circle governance. Everyone has a say. Decisions would be consensual.
Circle governance was a way of having kind of mutual responsibility and shared accountability, shared responsibility, more a little interdependent. It was time-consuming. It was messy. Everybody knew every step of the way, all along the way. Their voice was heard, they knew what was coming, and could participate.
In 2007, SOS Circle members elected Sister Marilyn MacDonald as Community Director, with Sisters Adwa Zampese and Anne McNally as counselors. Their mandate was to begin the process of dying out.
The biggest challenge, the biggest suffering, the biggest struggling within myself. Because after being trained to become a novice director and vocation director, coming to the novitiate and finding no one to share what I had received or what I could offer, was the moment that I realized that the Sisters of Service were beginning to die out. And to me, that was a struggle, a great struggle, a struggle almost of fate.
In 2012, they signed a sponsorship agreement with the Sisters of St. Joseph of Toronto. SOS had come full circle with the Sisters of St. Joseph, there at the beginning in 1922 and there at the ending.
We were blessed to have a warm and caring community the Sisters of St. Joseph of Toronto, who sponsored us with open arms, while for us, still remaining who we always were, Sisters of Service, until the last sister will die. At the sponsorship ceremony, the Sisters of St. Joseph cried with us and rejoiced with us.
It had all come to an end, or had it?